My name is Ryan Mitchell. I am 38 years old now. But the experience I am about to describe happened when I was 17. During a high school outdoor education trip that our school organized every spring, I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. And every year, our school sent the junior class to spend 3 days camping in the mountains as part of a leadership and wilderness skills program. The idea was simple: teach teenagers basic survival skills, navigation, teamwork, and how to spend time away from phones and technology. Our trip took place inside a remote section of Allegheny National Forest, a massive forest area known for long hiking trails, thick hardwood trees, and isolated valleys where you can walk for miles without seeing another person. There were about 24 students in our group. Along with 3 teachers and 1 park ranger who helped guide the trip, we hiked nearly 5 miles from the parking area to reach a primitive camping zone near a small lake surrounded by dense forest. Unlike public campgrounds, this location had no roads, no lights, and no nearby buildings. Just forest, water. In a clearing where groups were allowed to pitch tents. Our teachers divided us into smaller groups of 4 students per tent. My group included my best friend Josh, another guy named Marcus, and a quiet kid named Daniel who mostly kept to himself. The first day felt more like a school adventure than anything scary. We learned how to read topographic maps, how to start a fire safely, and how to purify lake water using portable filters. By evening, everyone was exhausted from hiking and carrying gear. So after dinner around the campfire, most of us crawled into our tents pretty early. Our tent was placed near the edge of the clearing, maybe 30 yards from the lake. And behind our tent, the forest became extremely thick. Tall trees growing close together with almost no moonlight reaching the ground. At around midnight, I woke up suddenly, not because of a sound exactly, but because the air inside the tent felt strange, heavy. Camping experts often mention that temperature changes during the night can wake people up, especially in forest areas where cool air settles quickly after sunset. But this felt different. The tent felt colder than it should have been. I could see faint moonlight through the thin fabric and hear the soft sound of water from the lake nearby. Everyone else in the tent seemed to sleep. Then I heard footsteps, not outside the tent, but somewhere in the forest behind us, slow steps moving through leaves and small branches. At first I assumed it was a deer or maybe a raccoon. Forests at night are full of animals moving around. But after a minute, the sound stopped. Then I heard another sound, wood tapping, like someone lightly knocking 2 sticks together. 3 slow taps, then silence, then again, 3 taps. The sound repeated several times. Tap, 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 to pit. Didn't sound like an animal. It sounded deliberate. I quietly sat up in my sleeping bag and listened more carefully. After a few minutes, Josh stirred next to me. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. So it wasn't just me. The tapping happened again. 3 slow knocks somewhere in the dark forest behind the tent. At this point, both of us were fully awake. Josh reached for his flashlight, but I stopped him. Something about the sound made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. After a while, the tapping stopped completely. We waited several minutes, but nothing else happened. Eventually, Josh fell asleep again. But I stayed awake for a long time staring at the tent ceiling. About 30 minutes later, I heard something new. Footsteps again, but this time they were much closer. Close enough that I could hear leaves compressing under weight. The steps moved slowly along the tree line behind our tent. Then they stopped, directly behind us. The strange thing about camping in remote forests is that when someone stands nearby in complete darkness, you often feel their presence even if you cannot see them. It's an instinct humans developed over thousands of years. And at that moment, I was certain something was standing just a few feet outside the tent, not moving, just standing there. My heart started pounding so loudly, I thought it might wake the others. Then I heard breathing. Low, slow, and very close. I froze completely. Every survival instinct in my body told me not to move, because predators often investigate unfamiliar objects quietly before deciding what to do. But after a few seconds, the breathing stopped. The footsteps began again, walking slowly along the back of the tent. Then, away into the forest, I thought that was the end of it. But maybe 10 minutes later, something happened that still bothers me even now. From somewhere deeper in the trees, I heard the tapping sound again. Tap tapped. Then another tapping sound answered from farther away. 3 taps. It continued like that for several minutes. The same pattern. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Almost like 2 different locations communicating through the forest. The next morning during breakfast, I told one of the teachers what we heard. He assumed it was probably a woodpecker or branches hitting each other in the wind. But the park ranger who was guiding our trip listened carefully. Then he asked exactly how many taps we heard. When I told him 3, he went quiet for a moment. Later that afternoon during a hiking lesson, he walked beside me and explained something quietly. He said sometimes people in remote forests report hearing rhythmic tapping sounds at night. 3 knocks, repeated over long distances. Search and rescue teams occasionally use similar patterns to communicate while looking for missing hikers. But the ranger said something that stuck with me. He told me no rescue teams had been operating anywhere near our location that night, and the nearest road was miles away. He also said wild animals do not produce perfectly repeated tapping patterns like that. When our camping trip ended 2 days later, we hiked back to the parking area and boarded the school buses to go home. Nothing else strange happened during the trip. But years later, when I studied wilderness survival and outdoor safety, I learned something interesting. In extremely remote forests, sound can travel surprisingly far at night, sometimes more than a mile through dense trees. Which means if someone or something was tapping wood together in that forest, there could have been several of them, spread far apart, communicating through the darkness. And every once in a while, when I remember that night, I realize something that still makes me uneasy. Those tapping sounds were not random. They always came in groups of 3. And every time one set of taps happened, another answered somewhere deeper in the forest, like something out there was responding. I still remember that weekend clearly, because nothing about it was supposed to be dangerous. Nothing about it felt unusual at the beginning. It was just a simple camping trip. The kind thousands of people take every year across the United States. My name is Emily Carter. I was 27 at the time. I lived in Colorado Springs and worked as a freelance graphic designer. Most of my days were spent indoors in front of a computer. So every few months I tried to escape the city and spend time outdoors. Fresh air, quiet forests, the kind of environment that resets your mind. That October, I decided to go camping alone near the San Juan National Forest. It is a huge forest area in Colorado, beautiful but also extremely remote in certain sections. And that remoteness is exactly what attracts campers and hikers. Before leaving, I did what most experienced campers do. I checked the weather forecast. I packed basic survival gear: headlamp, portable stove, extra batteries, bear spray, a satellite emergency beacon. In national forests, cell signal disappears quickly, so experienced hikers always carry something for emergencies. The campground I chose was small and rarely crowded. Only about 6 campsites along a narrow dirt road surrounded by tall pine trees. The closest town was about 40 minutes away. When I arrived in the late afternoon, the forest felt peaceful. Sunlight filtering through the trees, dry pine needles covering the ground. The air smelled clean and cold the way mountain air usually does. There were only 2 other cars in the campground. One old pickup and a small RV parked far down the road. I set up my tent, built a small fire. Cooked instant noodles on my camping stove. Everything felt normal, relaxing. The kind of quiet people actually pay for when they go on outdoor trips. Around 8:30, the forest became completely dark. In remote areas, darkness arrives fast, especially in October when the sun sets early. I turned off my lantern and just sat by the fire for a while, listening to the forest. If you have never camped deep in the woods, you might not realize how loud nature can be at night. Insects buzzing, branches moving. Distant animal calls: owls, coyotes, sometimes elk. Those sounds are normal, and experienced campers learn to recognize them quickly. But around 10, something felt different. The forest became quiet, not peaceful quiet. More like the kind of silence where something has disturbed the natural rhythm. I noticed it slowly. First, the insects stopped. Then the wind seemed to die down. even the distant animal sounds disappeared. Biologists actually talk about this phenomenon sometimes. Animals often go silent when a predator moves through an area. At the time, I told myself it was probably a mountain lion passing through somewhere far away. Mountain lions live throughout Colorado forests. They are extremely stealthy and rarely attack humans. But their presence can cause smaller animals to stop making noise. So I ignored it, finished my tea, and crawled into my tent. My sleeping bag was warm, and the temperature outside was dropping quickly, probably around 40 degrees. I was almost asleep when I heard footsteps, slow footsteps, crunching softly on dry pine needles. At first, I assumed it was a deer. Deer move through campsites constantly. They are curious animals and often wander close to tents looking for food. But after a few seconds, I noticed something strange. The steps were too steady, too heavy, and they were circling my campsite. Left side, pause. Slow step, pause, another step. My heart started beating faster. Experienced campers know that large animals can investigate campsites. Black bears sometimes approach if they smell food. But bears usually make a lot more noise, branches snapping, heavier movement. This sounded deliberate, almost careful. I grabbed my headlamp, but didn't turn it on immediately. I just listened. The footsteps stopped, then something touched the outside of my tent. A slow, dragging movement across the fabric. My breath caught in my throat. I turned on the headlamp and aimed the light at the tent wall. Nothing, just the thin yellow fabric glowing from the light. The footsteps began again. But now they were behind the tent, slow, methodical steps. My mind started racing through possibilities. A curious hiker, someone from the RV, maybe a ranger checking campsites. But no one said anything. No voice, no flashlight beam. Just those slow steps. Then I heard breathing. Low, heavy breathing, very close. Close enough that I could hear the air moving in and out. At that moment, my brain shifted into pure survival mode. Because every safety guide for campers says the same thing. If you hear something investigating your tent at night, make noise, turn on lights, make your presence known. Most animals avoid humans once they realize someone is inside. So I unzipped the tent quickly and stepped outside with my headlamp on full brightness. The campsite was empty. My fire had burned down to glowing embers. The forest stood silent and dark around me. No animal, no person, nothing. But the ground near my tent showed disturbed pine needles. Something had definitely walked there. I walked a few steps with the light sweeping the trees, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I saw the tracks. They looked almost like human footprints, but wrong, too long, too narrow, and spaced strangely far apart. I stood there frozen, trying to understand what I was seeing, because I know the tracks of common animals. Deer, elk, bear, raccoon, these matched none of them. Then something moved deeper in the trees. Not fast, just a slight shift between two trunks. My headlamp beam hit the spot. For a split second, I saw something tall standing between the trees. Perfectly still, the shape looked almost human. But the proportions were off. Arms too long, body thin. Head tilted at an unnatural angle the moment the light touched it. It stepped backward into darkness, completely silent. My body reacted before my mind did. I ran back to my tent and zipped it shut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the zipper. For the next hour, I didn't move. I just listened. And every few minutes I heard it again, those slow footsteps circling the campsite, never rushing, never approaching the tent again, just walking back and forth, back and forth. Sometime around 3 in the morning, the forest sounds slowly returned. Insects buzzing again, wind moving through branches, and the footsteps stopped. When the sun finally came up, I packed my gear in less than 10 minutes and left the campground. On the drive out, I passed the other campsites. The old pickup was gone. The RV site was empty. Later that week, I called the forest ranger office just out of curiosity. I described the strange tracks I had seen. The ranger paused for a moment before answering. He said hikers sometimes report unusual footprints in remote areas of the forest, usually misidentified animal tracks, but he also said something else that still bothers me. He told me that in certain parts of the San Juan forest, people sometimes report hearing footsteps circling their campsites at night. Slow footsteps that never approach the tent and never leave visible animal tracks. I have never gone camping alone again. Because sometimes when the wind moves outside my apartment at night, I still remember the sound of those steps. Slow, patient, circling, like whatever was out there was waiting for me to fall asleep again. My name is Daniel Harper. I am 34 years old. I live in Ohio. And the story I am about to tell happened during what was supposed to be one of the happiest weekends my family had planned that year. It was early June, warm but not too hot, the kind of weather that makes people want to leave the city and spend time outdoors. My wife Sarah had been asking for months if we could take our 2 kids camping. Something simple, something fun, roasting marshmallows, sleeping in a tent, letting the kids experience nature. So I booked a campsite at a large public campground inside Wayne National Forest in southeastern Ohio. That forest covers a massive area, thousands of acres of hills, dense trees, creeks, and long gravel roads that cut deep into remote sections. It is a beautiful place, but like most large forests in the United States, it can also become extremely quiet and isolated. Once night falls, we arrived in the late afternoon. Our kids, Emma, who was 9, and Tyler, who had just turned 6, were excited the entire drive. They had never camped before, and everything felt like an adventure to them. The campsite itself looked perfect, a flat patch of ground surrounded by tall oak and maple trees, a wooden picnic table, a fire ring, and a narrow trail leading down toward a small creek about 200 yards away. Family campgrounds are usually safe environments. Most people there are parents with kids or hikers looking for a quiet weekend. The nearest campsite to ours was about 50 yards away, close enough that you could see their lantern light through the trees. The first evening was exactly what we expected camping to be. We cooked hot dogs over the fire. The kids chased fireflies between the trees. Sarah laughed when Tyler tried to roast a marshmallow and accidentally set it on fire. It felt normal, comfortable, the kind of simple memory families try to create. Around 10:30, we put the kids in the tent. Our tent was large enough for all 4 of us. A basic family dome tent with sleeping bags laid out side by side. Outside, the forest was alive with normal nighttime sounds. Frogs down near the creek, insects buzzing, leaves moving in the breeze. After a while, the kids fell asleep, and Sarah drifted off not long after. But I stayed awake for a bit, listening to the forest the way many campers do on their first night. Camping guides often say that the woods at night are full of unfamiliar sounds, and sometimes your brain interprets them as something threatening, even when they are completely natural. At first, everything sounded normal, but sometime after midnight I heard something unusual, a voice very faint somewhere in the trees. At first I thought it was another camper talking quietly at a nearby site. Sound travels strangely through forests at night, so voices can sometimes seem farther away than they actually are. But after a few seconds, I realized the voice sounded like a child. I froze inside the sleeping bag, listening carefully. It sounded like someone calling a name, softly, over and over, "Mom," then silence. Then again, "Mom." The voice sounded distant. Maybe somewhere down near the creek. My first thought was that a kid from another campsite had wandered away from their parents, which unfortunately does happen in large campgrounds. So I quietly unzipped the tent and stepped outside with my flashlight. The campground road was empty. The nearby campsite lantern had been turned off. Everyone seemed to be asleep. Then I heard the voice again. Clearer this time, "Mom." Coming from the direction of the creek, my stomach tightened, because the voice sounded exactly like my son Tyler. But Tyler was asleep inside the tent behind me. I turned around and looked through the mesh window of the tent. Both kids were still there. Curled up in their sleeping bags, the voice came again. "Mom," same tone, same pitch, exactly like Tyler's voice. At that moment, something about the situation felt deeply wrong. Because one of the first safety rules in wilderness camping is that children rarely wander far at night without making a lot of noise, crying, shouting, calling loudly. This voice was calm, almost mechanical, just repeating the same word. I walked a few steps toward the trail leading to the creek, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness between the trees. "Hello," I called quietly. No answer. Then the voice repeated again. "Mom," closer this time. My entire body went cold, because the voice was coming from somewhere ahead of me in the trees. But at the same time, I could hear Tyler breathing softly inside the tent behind me. My brain tried to explain it logically. Maybe another child with a similar voice. Maybe sound bouncing through the forest in a strange way. But then the voice changed slightly. It said "Dad" in Tyler's voice. My legs refused to move for a second. Every instinct in my body suddenly told me not to walk toward the sound. There is a strange psychological effect people sometimes describe in wilderness survival stories. An intense gut feeling that something is wrong even when you cannot logically explain why. I slowly backed away from the trail. The voice stopped immediately. The forest went quiet. For the next hour, I sat inside the tent, awake, listening, my flashlight in my hand. Nothing else happened that night. Morning came normally. Sunlight through the trees, birds singing, the campground waking up again. At breakfast, I asked the ranger at the entrance station if there had been any reports of lost children overnight. He looked confused and said no. Then he asked why I was asking. So I explained what I heard. The ranger stared at me for a moment before answering. He said something that made the back of my neck go cold. He told me hikers occasionally report hearing voices in the woods that sound like people they know, friends, family members, children. But when they follow the voice, there is never anyone there, he said. The safest thing to do in that situation is exactly what I had done. Ignore it, stay in your campsite, and never follow the voice into the forest at night. We packed up early that morning and drove home. My kids still talk about that camping trip like it was a normal family adventure. But sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, I remember standing near that trail, hearing my son's voice coming from the dark trees calling for me, even though he was asleep right behind me inside the tent.